Brad, I want to impart to you what I think is a deeply held truth, and you tell me how you come down on this, okay?
All right.
I want to posit that a jacuzzi is heaven on earth. There is nothing nicer than sliding into a deliciously warm, not too hot jacuzzi. And with guests, you're all talking. It's a human soup. It's wonderful, right? But I will posit that the opposite is true, which is that a sauna is hell on earth, that you are willingly subjecting yourself to misery by going into a sauna. Are you a sauna or a jacuzzi person, Brad Geiger?
I gotta admit, I like them both. You're telling me you don't like a good schwitz?
No, I hate it. In fact, I honestly would pay money to get out of going into a sauna.
Really?
I don't remember what Comic-Con we were at, but there was a bunch of cartoonists that were staying at a hotel that was surprisingly nice for us. Like it was nicer than we deserved. And they had a sauna, like a big group sauna. And so like 20 people were going down to the sauna. I was like, nope, I am not doing that.
I remember, I was there. I remember that place, and it was great fun. Yeah,
Did you go in the sauna? I don't remember.
You pour the water on the rocks and it makes the steam, and then you just sit there and sweat, and it's very warm and toasty, and you can relax. It's fantastic. A nice sauna. Oh man, if I had a choice between putting like a jacuzzi out back or a sauna in the basement, I think I'd still go with the jacuzzi, but a sauna is really nice.
So what, to you, it's a relaxing thing? It triggers relaxation to be uncomfortably warm and sweating?
Well, first of all, yes, it is very relaxing, but there's a part of it that is so nice when you step out of it. It's almost like...
So the joy comes from leaving a sauna, not from being in a sauna.
It's the same joy you get out of hitting yourself in the head with a hammer. It feels so good when you stop.
I love that angle. I didn't even see that. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about schwitzing and making comics.
And jumping in the jacuzzi and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We've got a couple topics on the docket today that we're really excited about. One, in fact, that we've kind of been talking about, Brad, if we're honest about it, for the better part of 4 to 6 weeks, just on the phone with each other, trying to make sense of it. And that topic is going for traffic versus going for an audience, because we're seeing some younger cartoonists who we respect and who we see they've got the chops, but they're going for traffic and they're not going for an audience. Yeah. And so I thought, Brad, what a nice thing to open up the show with today, which is talk about building traffic versus building an audience. Why don't you take us through, what does that mean to you first before we get into it and how we're seeing it happen?
There's a real trend right now out there, and it has been for several years. And if you want to see an example of this in the wild, the best place to find it is on Reddit, where this thing is very, very pronounced. It's a little bit harder to see it on some of the other social media, but if you go to our comics and our webcomics, particularly on Reddit, you'll see a number of comics that are clearly building traffic, but they're not so much building audience. Okay. Right. And what happens is, as a result of that, the first place I always look is Patreon, right? Because if you're building audience, chances are, as long as you've got your Patreon set up correctly, right? And you're not making all those dumb mistakes. You're not doing physical rewards. You don't have a $1 tier. You're not doing all the mistakes that we've warned you about for years. If you've got your Patreon set up correctly, you can do pretty well if you're building an audience. And what we see time and time again is comics that have monster numbers on Reddit that don't have really good audience participation. They don't have the Patreon. They have a hard time putting the Kickstarter together. When it comes time to doing the monetization, it's lacking. And it's been perplexing us. We've been turning it around like a puzzle, like what's going on. And it wasn't until Dave brought up that this is a question of building traffic versus audience that it finally fell into place and that we knew how we would be able to talk about this conundrum.
Yeah, and credit where credit's due. I think I picked up this phraseology. It was either from Ezra Klein on his podcast from the New York Times or from Casey Newton, I think. But anyway, the idea of building traffic versus building an audience really is, I think, central to what we're seeing on subreddits and sometimes on social media. But before we talk about what we're seeing online, I want to throw myself under the bus before I throw anybody else under the bus. Okay, so let me talk, and this might be more helpful to show you what we're talking about in terms of building an audience. So Sheldon has been running, my comic strip Sheldon has been running online for 25 years, right? There's 4,000 Sheldons in the archive. It has a cast of characters, but like any comic strip, you could miss 1, you could miss 10, you could miss 40, and you're jumping right back in. You don't really miss anything. You don't necessarily have to go back to the archives.
No,
you don't necessarily,
there's no continuity.
No, there's no continuity, especially anymore. And you don't necessarily have to even be aware that there are 4,000 comics in the comic strip. So, and as a result, on Reddit, it goes way more viral. On social media, it goes way more viral than my other comic strip Drive. But what I want to point out before I go on to Drive is with Sheldon, it could get to the top of our comics, and in so doing, it can get to the front page of Reddit. And I've had not many, maybe 3 or 4 comics get to the top of the front page of Reddit, right? Just huge numbers there where the traffic is bonkers.
Yes.
But people don't stick around, right? Because I went for traffic with that joke or with that punchline or with whatever it was. I didn't go for an audience. Now compare this to Drive, which I think has about 1/1000th of the virality of Sheldon. I can't get a Drive comic to do diddly squat either on social media or on Reddit or the like. And so as a result, I kind of don't even share them much anymore. Like there's sometimes a couple weeks go by and I've forgotten to share Drives. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, here's today's Drive, everybody. Because what I've done with Drive by hook or by crook is I've gone for audience rather than traffic. And I think, frankly, a lot of the audience growth that I see from Drive is word of mouth, friends telling friends that like sci-fi, hey, you got to check out this story. There's really something to this, that kind of thing. And so I obviously didn't do it for that. I did it because I wanted to tell the story, and I did it for me. I'm doing the storytelling for me and sharing it with the world. But I am increasingly aware of my own faults that Sheldon goes for traffic and Drive goes for audience. And I think the difference shows up when you go to kickstart one of the books, because Sheldon, if I kickstart a book, will come in somewhere between $25,000, $35,000. Drive, if I go to kickstart a book, comes in somewhere between $125,000, $150,000. And that's a big difference when it comes time to kickstart a book. So the audience sticks around and they're committed to it because they are an audience. They're not just fly-by-night traffic.
Right.
So am I right in leading off with that, Brad, as the description of traffic versus audience?
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head. And I got to tell you, it just so happens I was at a dinner party with some neighbors not too long ago. And the topic of and I'm just going to have to throw this guy under the bus. There's no way of getting around it. The topic of Zippy the Pinhead came up, that syndicated comic strip, not Ziggy, who we take playful jabs at from time to time, but Zippy by Bill Griffith. All right. And
for those outside of America, I mean, obviously you can Google it, but how would you describe it if someone's driving around the metro right now, Brad? How would you describe it?
How would I describe it? Well, that plays right into my story. So we're talking about the comic strip Zippy the Pinhead. Now, listen, I'll just preface this. I'm just one person. I don't represent anybody other than me, but for my personal taste, it's not my favorite comic strip. In fact, I have a visceral reaction in the negative to this comic strip.
Sure.
Because it it never makes sense. There's no punchline. There's no story. There's no nothing. It's the antithesis to what I personally think comics are. For me, one guy, Brad Geiger, who doesn't amount to a hill of beans. Just in case Bill is listening, I'm sure you're great, but it's really not for me. Okay. And this comic comes up, and the two guys I was sitting with said, "Oh my gosh, that's a great comic strip." I said, "No, it's not. No, it's really not." And they said, "No, I said, "It's never made me laugh. It's never had an interesting story. There's nothing there." And I said, 20 years ago, when I would have actually taken a syndicated contract, it made me angrier because it's taking up space that somebody who wants to write a story or write a joke or do something formative could do. And now It doesn't matter, but it's still taking up space, and that offends me. And they said, "You don't understand, Brad. You don't understand," they said. "It's not supposed to be funny. It's a non sequitur. It's absurdist. It's supposed to be weird, and it's not supposed to make sense." And that's when the Reddit thing clicked with me as well, because they don't actually like the comic. They like being inside the joke. They like knowing that they get what's happening. Right? That dummies like me are perplexed looking for a punchline. They get it because it's not supposed to have a punchline. And because they're so proud of how smart they are, they like that comic. Mind you, they would never buy a collection of Zippy the Pinhead comics. Nobody would. As far as I'm concerned, because a bunch of comics that don't make sense. Nobody wants to read a whole bunch of those. Okay. They would never buy a Zippy book, but they like patting themselves on the back that they're so clever that they know that it's not supposed to have a punchline. I think the same thing is going on Reddit with certain comics that they certainly do have. It's certainly not a one-to-one comparison. They do have punchlines. They do have stories, but they don't have the audience, but they've got the clicks. And the reason people are clicking those comics is because they get the in-joke. They get the reference. They get that it's a thing. Right? Nobody wants to buy a whole bunch of these. And you see these, they're, for lack of a better word, Dave, I'm going to call them gimmick comics. They've got a gimmick. It's always the same gimmick every comic. Every comic is going to be about horseshoes. Right? I'm the horseshoe comic. Every comic is going to be a horseshoe in the first panel, a pun in the second, and everybody, yells and goes whoopee on the third panel. Right? That's my comic. And every time it's the same thing. Right? People are going to start to get that likes because they're proud of themselves that they get what's going on. They're the inside. They're the in
I'm in
crowd.
the community enough where I see this enough and I get it. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
We're all here, friends. Yeah, exactly.
But and LOL, that's so random. But nobody wants a collection of those because why would you read an entire book full of horseshoe comics? You wouldn't. You wouldn't. It's all the same thing over and over and over again. There's no there. It's great for building traffic, but it's shit for building audience.
Yeah, gimmick is the right word. And we've seen this before, not just in comics and other mediums too. It's when you've like, for example, on TV shows, the famous version of this is when you have a cast-based ensemble and a new character comes in, like an Urkel or what's the guy on Dynamite from the 70s? I forget what.
Jimmy Walker.
Jimmy Walker.
Yeah.
Or a little kid that comes onto the Brady Bunch, like the cousin
Oliver.
Kind of blanking on all the names. Anyway, anytime a show. You see it and they lean into the gimmick because the gimmick is working and dear God, they just want to stay on for one more season. Yeah. So the gimmick replaces characters. The gimmick replaces plots and storylines. The gimmick replaces character arcs. The gimmick is all that they lean into after a while because that's what's getting the press. That's what's getting the eyeballs. And we see this happening again and again on social media and specifically on Reddit, where the comic becomes the shtick, and the shtick replaces any character development or storyline development or individual punchlines. It's just, hey, shtick again today. How about some more shtick? Who wants another gimmick? Hey, how about some gimmick with your shtick? Hey, today it's shtick with some gimmick, And you're like, okay. And like Brad said, it does get the clicks, and I think that's why they keep going with it. But it doesn't build you an audience. And I say that, again, one of the reasons why I led with Sheldon and Drive, I say that as a guy who has one audience that has traffic but no audience, and the other one who has less traffic but all audience. That's not the way that I, as an older cartoonist, probably speaking to younger cartoonists, that's not the way you want to build your career, I don't think.
Yeah. And in terms of building a career, I'm gonna put out there that you can do okay. You can make money with this just playing the numbers, right? If you're pulling down monster numbers on Reddit, and again, I'm going to say this again, if you have your Patreon set up correctly, right? And again, no physical rewards. You're not screwing around with the $1 reward, and you've got something set up that's an exclusive, that's a high demand exclusive at a higher tier. And we've always recommended 2, 5, and 10. Right? As your tiers. Today with inflation, if you were just starting today, maybe that would be like 3, 7, and 10, 3, 7, and 12. I would, in other words, if I was just starting today, I don't know that it would be quite that same, but we're house numbers here. We're in the area, 2, 5, and 10. $2 is your support tier. You're not giving anything of significance away at that tier. That's just for the people who do enjoy what you do. Keep doing it. $5 is a low demand exclusive. Can't get it anyplace else, but it's a moderate to low demand. And then at a $10 level, that's where you put a high demand exclusive. Now, if you've got your Patreon set up right, using that as a general guideline, and you're pulling down monster numbers on Reddit, now you can just play the percentages that 1% are going to consider doing something involving you with Patreon. They're going to be a member of your Patreon community, and you can play the numbers. But that's where it's really, really important that you understand how Patreon works, because if you don't, you're going to be one of these guys that's posting all the time on social media that it's impossible to make a living in webcomics. I don't know, I can't do it. And then you're looking at their Patreon saying, please listen to my show. I've explained it all. but yeah, you've got to have that set up right, and you can play the numbers. But the long term, and I'm going to guess that there's a second way too, Dave, that you could build this into a community, build this into a career. Because you could build that up, build that notoriety, build that traffic, even with no audience, and then you pivot into some kind of publishing, right? You sign a contract with somebody and you're doing a book now, or you're doing a different title. I would really recommend a different title. Or you're illustrating somebody else's writing. You see what I'm saying? You can take that notoriety, because that's going to get you on the radar of a publisher. And then, well, frankly, you've got to deal with all of the things that we warn you about on this show when it comes to dealing with a publisher. Now you've got to deal with all of those issues, but at least you're not wondering where your next paycheck's going to come from.
Right. And I actually think that second path is viable. Like, you build up an audience that knows you, likes you, respects you, or not even an audience, just you build up traffic with the sort of gimmicky comic, the shtick comic. And then I wouldn't say transition in the sense that you stop the gimmicky comic, but I think, and maybe Brad would co-sign this as well, you probably transition by doing them side by side. So you're transitioning people over to your more story-focused comic, or your character-focused comic, or your punchline-focused comic that has a little bit more audience potential. And that's what I did with Drive coming off of Sheldon. Is I just suddenly end Sheldon. Sheldon ostensibly became the loss leader to get people becoming aware of me, so that they could then get into Drive. And in some respects, maybe that's what Chris Straub did with Chainsaw Suit, that then was the loss leader to get people into Brood Hollow. Or, I can think of other cartoonists that took their high traffic comics and transitioned those into high audience comics.
Well, and by the way, if you don't want to sign a contract with a publisher, and we've talked for hours and hours about the dangers of doing that and how we really don't recommend it so much. If you wanted to do it on a self-publishing basis, that's your $5 exclusive reward. Is this new thing, right? That you try
right.
You've got a high traffic thing. Now you're going to build a high audience thing, and you're going to use that high traffic comic to drive audience to the high audience comic. And that's your $5 Patreon exclusive, right?
Yeah.
That's a great place to put that. In other words, you do have options. If you're one of these comics that's, again, doing monster numbers on Reddit, but it's not coming through in dollars and cents, this is the situation that we're talking about. And this is one of the ways. We've already given you a few options that you can think about, but you do have options if you find yourself in that situation.
Right. And let me ask you this, Brad. Have you ever purchased or did you ever buy as a kid a Marmaduke collection?
No.
Because I feel like, as a way that's sort of a universal example, Marmaduke was a gimmick comic. It was every day, oh, he's such a big dog, like that. And there was no character development. There was no, in the sense that, like, by comparison, as a single panel comic, Family Circus did have character development. You came to know what Billy was. You came to know what the other kids that I forgot are.
Good. Yeah, Jeffy. There was a Jeffy.
You knew Mommy had a. What I'm getting at is, like, it at least it swung above what it potentially could do with a single panel. But Marmaduke leaned into the gimmickness, and that's why I think it sort of becomes the chuckle comic of, like, oh, Marmaduke, you're such a big dipshit, that kind of a thing. Again, I want to be sympathetic to the younger cartoonists that lean into this, because we are all desperate for a pulse online. Yeah. And so, of course, I see how it happens. You do one or two strips that lean into this gimmick, and it does gangbusters. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, well, holy shit, I have a pulse online. This is amazing. Yes. I suddenly have an influx of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of new people that are checking out the comic. And so to that, I want to counterbalance a story that, of all people, from Stefan Pastis of Pearls Before Swine. I think I've told this story before, but I was up in his studio outside of San Francisco. And he had these rules posted on his wall above his drawing desk, like 10 or 15 things to do or rather not do in Pearls Before Swine. And I was like, what the hell is this? And he goes, oh, those are and he starts going through the list. And one of the things on the list was, don't overuse the alligators. And I was like, what's all this? And he's like, people love the alligators. If I do an alligator comic, I get 50 billion letters or emails and saying how much they loved it. And God, just please lean on the alligators. But if I do the alligators all the time, it becomes a gimmick comic, and then it loses what it is. It becomes Urkel or Jimmy Walker or Cousin Oliver. Suddenly it takes over Pearls Before Swine, Mm-hmm. And so in that moment, I was taken aback, because it's such wisdom to know, basically, to control going for the traffic in order to build audience. You know what I mean? He was basically choosing, I'm going to build audience with Pearls Before Swine versus I'm going to build traffic with Pearls Before Swine.
Yeah. No, and that takes a good degree of self-realization and self-restraint. I can't underline that enough. The fact that this thing that we're talking about is not criticism, right? We're not saying, oh, shame on you, you're doing a gimmick comic.
Absolutely.
In fact, in the latter part of the last 5 years, it would have been very difficult not to have found yourself in the standpoint of doing what we are calling a gimmick comic, right? If you were just a brand new cartoonist last 5 years coming up through whatever social media was your strong suit at that point, it would have been hard not to have been corralled into doing this, because everything that you knew was chasing the likes, chasing the upvotes, chasing all of that. And of course, very quickly, you're going to be corralled right into doing one of these things that we just got done talking about. Right. So it's very, I can see where this is coming from. And I think the main things that Dave and I wanted to communicate today, because we see a lot of these people on social media complaining. They're very upset. They feel lost. They feel like they don't know where their career is coming from. And so Dave and I have been on the phone for weeks saying, we got to talk about this. We've got some ideas that we want to share that we think would be useful. But how do we talk about this without sounding dismissive? How do we talk about this without sounding like we're saying that you're a hack? You're not a hack if you're one of these people doing one of these comics. Far from it. You've done very logically what anybody would have done in your standpoint.
Yes.
Anybody would. So now you're at where you're at. What are you going to do about it? That's what we wanted to talk about. Right. And that's where I wanted to make sure we talked about setting up that Patreon correctly, talking about doing a pivot, talking about how you can make that notoriety that you've built work for you instead of against you. And also keep an eye to the future, knowing that at some point you're going to have to start to develop something that takes off, just like Dave did with Drive. And it doesn't have to be story-based, right? But it's got to be something that is more geared towards building a community around this thing than just getting the likes. And there's two different things. One of them is mass appeal that unfortunately has very little value. Having mass appeal under newspapers was great.
It was great.
That sealed the deal. But today, not so much.
Yeah.
Right?
In fact, even 15 years ago, Brad, when we were under the ad model, wouldn't you say that was the way to go? If you could get mass appeal, you could make money having a comic that was, I don't know, just about Halo. And every day it was a joke about Halo, and that was sort of the gimmick. Even though like Halo died, Halo 2 came out. Now what do you do? Or everybody stops playing Halo. Now what do you do? There were a lot of gimmick comics that worked because it was an ad model. And so if you got a lot of eyeballs, it kind of works, and that was fine. Yeah. So, and again, it worked with Marmaduke in the newspaper. And in part, it works, like Brad says, on Reddit or on Instagram, where algorithms and people tend to go to the familiar and the, I've seen this before, I'm in the in-joke, I know what, and the things that are working. The problem is, do they buy a book? Do they support you on Patreon? Do they go after your Kickstarter? Maybe not, because while they love the gimmick of it, they don't really want to buy into the gimmick. It's just the thing that they clicked like on a couple dozen times,
Yeah. And how many times, going back to a whole nother offshoot of this conversation, remember when we talked about T-shirt psychology, right? Why does somebody buy a T-shirt? Because it helps them explain to the world around them who they are, right? It's a method of self-expression. And the further and further we get into comics culture, the more we see those kinds of decisions building around comics buying decisions. In other words, people buy a comic as an expression of that as well. They may not be holding that comic above their head when they're out on the subway going to work saying, this is who I am, but it's still a method of that. And that's where, if you are in this situation where where you find yourself at this crossroads, I'm gonna really try to encourage you to lean into something that's a little bit more niche. That's something that's a little bit more community oriented. Something that it speaks to a passion of yours that you want now that you've got this notoriety. That old joke, they always ask actors, well, what do you want to do next? And the actor goes, what I really want to do is direct. Right? This can be your what I really want to do is direct moment where you say, I've got this notoriety now. What I really want to do is this other thing. Yeah. And that's where I'm going to encourage you to lean into something that's a little bit more niche. It's going to be counterintuitive to everything that got you to this point. But I think my guess is that it's your best bet for pivoting into where your career lies.
Right. And let's talk about all the things you have going for you in this moment. By going for traffic and succeeding, you've proven that your writing is sharp, Your sense of pacing is sharp. Your word choices are sharp. Your line art is probably great. You probably have a clarity of both the marriage of your line art and your writing. You probably have good pacing in terms of bump, ba-dump, panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, panel 4. So you've got everything working for you. And now you have the benefit of recognized style. I know this guy. This is the girl that used to do blankety blank, right? Oh, yeah. I loved her work, And so now you do as Brad said, you do the transition. And it can be parallel. So like for Brad's example, hey, it's a comic strip. It's always about horseshoes. Well, maybe you transition that into a story-based comic around a horse farm or this or that. This is a completely blue sky. Yeah, exactly. It can be adjacent and still the thing you love and still gimmick adjacent. And by the way, you can still roll in the gimmick if you want from time to time, like Stepan does with the Gators. But you just put more meat on the plate rather than just all dessert. You know what I mean? You got a little bit more substance there to build people into an audience and not just traffic.
Absolutely. And that's what we wanted to wrap up with here, is to say that we see what's going on. We read these people talking on social media that they don't know where to go. And I think there are some answers, but the first part of it really comes in realizing that there's a difference between building traffic and building audience. And I think my personal viewpoint is that once you understand that part of what we're talking about, then you can make your best decision moving forward.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. All right, Brad, I've got 2 updates for everybody that I want to do mid-show here. Number 1 is if you are a cartoonist and you're going to San Diego Comic-Con and you are a good talker, I just want to let you know the heads up that right now is the time to submit panels for San Diego Comic-Con. There is information on their website, but you have about a month and a half, 2 months to get your panel idea in. I highly recommend it. If you have a topic that is niche to you or that you are passionate about, or you and 4 and 5 other cartoonist pals have done a certain thing really well or have a topic of interest that you think people will respond to, it's really fun. Don't you think, Brad? If no one has ever done a panel talk before, to jump up there and do a panel talk?
Oh, yeah. And like a lot of times people are like, well, they wouldn't want to hear from me. But you know what? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, in the words of the great Wayne Gretzky, right? Or Gretzky.
Exactly. Yeah. No, Brad's absolutely right. And honestly, we started doing panels in our mid-20s, probably younger than we deserve to be doing panels at San Diego Comic-Con. But also, I will say this to Comic-Con's great credit. It's still an incredibly welcoming place for all sorts of topics in the comics community. And it's like every kind of niche and interest in terms of comics panels I have seen at San Diego Comic-Con. So anyway, that's the short update, is get your panel ideas in for San Diego Comic-Con 2024. My second update is everybody, just a quick reminder that this was the year that I turned 50, and my request for the world, because I had never previously asked for this on the podcast, but I want to get to 500 pals over at patreon.com/comiclab. So we're making good progress, churning our way up there. But if you haven't done it yet, you're going to get over 300 episodes of our ProTips podcast, which goes out exclusively to Patreon. And you're also going to get access to the Discord server, which is a really fun, engaging, and helpful community of pros, pro-ams, and amateurs, all sharing the best idea. And like we said before, it's always best idea wins. And in general, it's a great community to be a part of.
Yeah. And I can't I can't express enough how proud I am of the Discord server, particularly, especially when I see some other entities and organizations trying to do the same thing with an online community and struggling with it. The fact that you can go into that Discord server and have a good, respectful, passionate conversation with other people who know what they're talking about, not some kind of, whack job, and really get down into the craft without having to wade through a bunch of self-promotion or something. Like, we've got a place, if you want to self-promote, we've got a channel for that. But that main Discord server is a place where there's really high-end conversation, really going into the weeds with people who know their stuff.
Yep.
And I can't tell you how proud I am that that's happening.
And also, Brad and I, with the strong recognition that there are many paths up the mountain in terms of building a comics career, there are people in that Discord server that have built a career and maintain a career and continue to grow a career in a very different way than we do it. And we're quick to acknowledge and welcome those viewpoints in because, by God, we might learn from them and vice versa. Right. So it's better to have all differing voices from webcomics and graphic novels and comic books in there on how they're stitching together, I think is the best way, stitching together multiple strategies to build their career. So anyway, do join us over at patreon.com/comiclab. That would be my big request for this year where I turn 50.
That's right. 500 at 50 for Dave Kellett. And let's talk about another. This is kind of going right back into that same genre of topic that we started the show off with. We couldn't not talk about this. This is really fascinating. Earlier this week, somebody posted their reflections on the Webtoons contract. All right. Now, this was something that was posted on Reddit, and since posting it, the original poster has deleted their account.
Oh, right? Really?
So it was probably a burner account. They didn't want to end up with any legal problems with having shared this information. But what they said was that they had been offered a Webtoons Originals deal a few months back, looked it over, and they thought it was extremely predatory. Quoting from the post, "I have experience in traditional comics, so I'm well versed in rights and such," unquote. The person said, "I couldn't believe it," and goes through 5 different areas where this contract was really problematic. Now, before we go, I'm going to go into those areas, but before we go any further, we have to say, we don't know about the veracity of any of this. Could be all bullshit. Yeah. So you've got to know that going in. Yeah. We don't know. We are not lawyers.
We don't know our ass from a hole in the ground. Specific contract and the newer version apparently that they're talking about. We've seen earlier versions of online posted contracts from Webtoons, but we haven't even seen this newer version of the Webtoons Originals contract. Right. So we're not going to focus in on the specifics of what is or is not in this contract. We want to talk more broad strokes about how we all should be thinking about a company like Webtoons or comics.com or King Features or anything that sort of amalgamates comics into a portal online. Right, Brad? Yeah.
Because I'll tell you what, as much as I'm of two minds on this. On one hand, like the first sentence, quoting here, basically the Webtoon Originals contract has evolved every year or so to become more and more predatory, unquote. I don't know how this person knows that. I don't know how they could, unless they had seen every version of the contract, which means that ostensibly maybe they had been offered a contract every year, which is doubtful. I don't know how they can make that. I don't know how they can make that claim. Right. So right from the giddy up, I'm a little bit, I've got to distance myself from it a little bit and start putting my analytical thinking cap on. On the other hand, here's the other side of my brain. They don't have a huge motivation to make stuff up. What would your motivation, other than you just want to cause trouble for Webtoons? What motivation would there be for this person to make it up? I don't know.
People are weird. It could be a motivation of just being an asshole. I don't know. That
could be just a jerk, right?
So let's do this. Let's talk about what to keep an eye out for in all sorts of contracts that might be either worrisome or predatory or dangerous to your long-term career by going for a short-term success. And unfortunately, I think a lot of cartoonists going back to the Marvel and DC days, they go for the short-term success at the pain of their long-term career. So, for example, yeah, great, you got your character Wolverine. He's doing really great. How you doing 30 years later on that income from that Wolverine? Not so great, right? Because it was kind of predatory what the rights were on that sort of stuff, right? Yeah. And so things that I look out for on contracts are, and again, not a lawyer, hire a lawyer. That's our big advice going into these things is hire a lawyer. It's a couple $100 to have them review a contract and have you look at it. You're going to want to hire an IP attorney. That's specifically what you want to look for, or a contracts attorney. And you're going to look out for things like this. These are not necessarily in this Webtoons contract. They might be, but things like this. The word perpetuity, when something is bound in perpetuity contractually, that's a big red flag because they're saying like, whatever you change it, well, yeah, you can leave this platform, you can leave this publisher, you can leave this agent, but some form of rights are in perpetuity. That's dangerous because you're never able to really leave. I mean, yes, you could sue. Yes, you could try to break out of a contract, all that sort of stuff. That's a hassle and it's expensive. Yeah. So you want to keep an eye out for the word perpetuity specifically. Something is in perpetuity.
And here's another phrase that you want to look out for in contracts in general, and that's work made for hire. Right. Yeah. And I never miss it. I was talking over there at Drexel University not too long ago, and I was giving a talk to a bunch of college students who were interested in comics. And I said, and I was talking about this very topic. Basically, the headline was that for over 100 years, artists and writers have been getting screwed by signing contracts, and it's about time that we wise up to it. Right. That was I didn't put it in that many words, but that was what was going on. And what I said to these kids was, who knows what it means if you say work made for hire in a contract? None of them knew. And I pointed to a couple of the older people there that were clearly professors. And I said, that's on you. You're not teaching these young people the world they're going out to. If they don't know what work made for hire means, you're setting them off for the slaughter, right? So I'll tell you right now, work made for hire means that anything you do under that contract, you do not have ownership of. The company does. Right. The holder of the contract owns that copyright. Right. And I say holder of the contract because it's not a person. It's a holder, because let's say you sign a work made for hire contract with company A. Company A either goes out of business, declares bankruptcy, gets bought by company B. Right. Now, company B might come in and buy company A, or they might take over the debt for pennies on the dollar and acquire that contract in the debt. Now you're dealing with another company that doesn't know you, doesn't care about you, doesn't care about your rights. And when you come to them and say, oh, hey, you know what? You've got my rights. Since company A is not doing anything with them anymore, being nice people, company B, you can just sell me back my rights or just rip up the contract, or we can work out a deal because you're not planning on doing anything with it. And company B, being good business people, are not going to agree to that because what if it's worth something? Right. So they're going to hold that contract.
It's an asset of that company. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. That they bought for pennies.
And listen, it's not that work made for hire is inherently always evil. If Hallmark comes to me and says, Dave, we'd like you to design 5 greeting cards, it's going to be work made for hire. Here's your pay for it. And I go, you know what? I always wanted to do a greeting card, but I don't need to own and control that copyright. That's Hallmark. And in fact, to do what they do in terms of selling that card into the UK market or the South African market or the American market, they need universal rights to it. So for me, it's a couple $1,000 and it's work made for hire. Sure, I'll sign that one. Or even a better example, when I hired Brad to do a Tales of the Drive story, that was work made for hire. Not because I necessarily wanted to be grabby from Brad, but just for like 20 years from now, if I want to do a reprint, I want to be able to reprint Drive and all the Tales stories without having to go to Brad or Brad's heirs or, whatever it is. And Brad's heirs, I think now you're dead in the ground.
I'm not dead yet. I'm still feeling very good.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times it's just clear and simple business. And for that, I try to pay artists a better rate because I'm buying out the rights basically. And I hope, Brad, that you felt like that was a good public rate.
Times 10. Yeah, I thought I was getting the better end of the deal, quite frankly.
And so usually, my opinion is if you're gonna be grabby, you got to pay for it. That's my attitude with contracts. But there's a lot of comics companies that are very grabby, and they don't pay for it. So you kind of lose and lose. Yes, so work made for hire and perpetuity, two things you want to look out for. Another thing that I always want to look out for is a phrase of like first right of refusal or sure, you can go somewhere else, but we have first right of refusal if it's going to be optioned into a video game or a TV show or a book. Basically, we get first crack at it. And I will tell you that yes, it's great if this web portal, whether it's Comics Kingdom or comics.com or Webtoons, they can build your comic up to something very great, and you could leave 5 or 6 years from now, and when the contract's over and you're off on a different site, but you try to go to sell it to television, and this other company that you did business with has first right of refusal in perpetuity, you're boned because no one else wants to develop something that someone else has the rights to, or at least partial rights to. So that one can get tricky. And I will say too, there's other things that are possible, because basically you have to look at it this way. They are investing in you, whatever this portal is, so that they can make the real money, which is down the line, either in print or as IP for a video game or a TV or a movie, or as some kind of agency to selling it on to someplace that will develop that IP for a video game, TV, or movie, right? So it's not, because we all know comics on an individual level can make a good living. On a corporate level, the money really is made with the IP going elsewhere. And so you want to make sure that your contract includes the rights that you maintain printing rights, you maintain merchandising rights, you maintain the IP rights, you maintain the right to select your own agent or agency that would represent you, right? Because all of that can get really dangerous if they've built you up and they're like, yeah, but now we got you, now we got you.
Yeah, and that last one you mentioned, having an agent, is really important. You don't want the company you're signing with to also be your agent. And sometimes you hear about this being written into a contract where they're like, oh, and also we're going to be your agent. It's going to be great. We're your publisher and your agent. No. You want your agent to be this. If you sign with an agent, you want that to be a third party person that has one goal, and that's to get you the best possible deal. And you want them to be a pit bull, right? You want them to be absolutely gnashing at the teeth to get you the right deal.
Gary Gnu.
Yes. But yeah, you want that to be somebody who's just in your corner. You don't want anybody giving themselves rights to your agency.
Again, mid-conversation reminder, Brad and I are not lawyers, and we're not saying you're going to see all these clauses in your contract. We're saying keep an eye out for them, but more important than any of that, have the lawyer that you're hiring keep an eye out for them. Like, you're not expected in this life to know all the ins and outs of law. Right. That's what the lawyer is for. This is the time when you are about to sign something that you spend $250 to $300 to $500 to hire somebody to look at that contract for you. This is literally like saying, I could do the electrical in my house myself. You could. Is it going to cost you tens of thousands afterward because you saved yourself $300 by doing the electrical yourself?
Yeah. And now you're standing on top of a smoking ruin.
And the same is true with contracts. You might not know you've made a grievous error 10, 15, 20 years down the line when the the comic that you've built up on whatever this publishing house or web portal or distributor or syndicate has helped you build it up. But then they have this clause in that contract that you were not fully cognizant of because you didn't hire a lawyer. And boy, did it come to bite you in the ass. And I can only say this in a way that I'm not trying to be mean to anybody, but I have seen so many cartoonists that we know, some of whom have GoFundMes right now, actively going on like month 6 of GoFundMes because they signed a thing they shouldn't have signed thinking, oh, they'll be nice. They seem like nice people, that kind of thing.
And also because they've been conned into that idea that has been perpetrated for decades of signing the standard rich and famous contract.
Right.
You know, somebody comes up in a limousine, rolls down the window, says, I think you've got what it takes. They point the golden finger at you, and then your life is made.
Right.
Newsflash, nobody's career works like that.
Right.
Nobody's career works like that, and few ever did. So here's the part that we're not getting to that's making our audience very upset. Let's get to the big part, because what especially our younger audience members are saying, but Brad and Dave, you don't understand. Webtoons is the only place that I can find an audience. There's no place else to find an audience willing to read a comic. I have to have my comic on Webtoons because it's the only place I can. How do we address those issues?
The first thing I will say is, I know I sound like an old man yelling at a cloud, but I actually get it. I really do. Yeah. I really do get it. Yeah. Is that the internet that I grew up with largely doesn't exist anymore. We've gone increasingly walled gardens and app-based, and kids grow up today not going to website to website to website or RSS feed to RSS feed to RSS feed. They kind of go to portals and to apps, and it is much more of a walled garden world. And frankly, the sort of quiet handshake agreement that social media used to have, the Twitter of 9 years ago before it became a Nazi playground, where you would say like, oh yeah, as long as you keep it under 140 characters, and you can link out, you can do what you want to do, and the people that follow you are going to see what you are sharing. That's all gone now. Social media is ostensibly broken in a lot of respects. And it's not just me saying this. The wider culture, you feel this as you're listening to this. You feel this, that social media is broken. It doesn't bring you the joy that it used to do. And it certainly doesn't bring us as cartoonists the success in reaching out to the people that actively love us, that want to do the things that we're asking them, whether it's Patreon or Kickstarter or buy a book or get a sticker or check out my new comic. They're not getting it. And the compact is sort of broken in social media. The world is a walled garden increasingly. And I just want to say, as an older cartoonist, I get it that it's really, really hard to find an audience in a world where it seems like only Webtoons is growing, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But here's the other side of that. They're out there. That audience is out there. Yeah. And yes, there is an argument to be made for Webtoons has gathered a whole bunch of that audience in one place, and you have a chance at getting your crack at them. And by the way, ask anybody that's ever posted anything on Webtoons. It ain't exactly that easy. I've made the argument in the past. Webtoons has a very a kind of narrow focused type of comic that does very well. And if you're not doing that thing, you're not going to do so well.
Would you say that's romance manga? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, okay, romance manga, which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with. It's perfectly fantastic.
No, nothing wrong. I was just curious what you thought it was. Yeah,
but that very narrow thing. And by the way, we haven't mentioned Tapastic recently in this, but Tapastic falls under that same category as well, where they have gathered a certain number of people, and you have a shot at them. Again, look at the top comics on Tapastic. Is your comic similar to those? Right. If not, you're probably going to have an uphill battle. But let's get off of both of those for a second. The fact of the matter is that there are people out there who are comics readers. And I want to first encourage you with our advice we've given for years. You need your own website. You need to build on your own ground. You need to have a base of operations. And the sooner you start, the better, right? Yeah. There are some free comics hosting options. I'm not as crazy about those. It's a little bit harder to start fresh with the WordPress, but even if you start with one of those free comics hosts and then transition to WordPress, your goal should be to running your own website.
And I can hear you as Brad is saying that. You're saying like, okay, great. I have my own website. I have my own MailChimp. I have my own mailing list. Yeah, but you're not getting to how do I get people there? But what we're saying is, as the core idea is, if you don't have the thing that you own and control, then what the hell are we even doing here? Because like all the advice that Brad and I are about to tell you of how to get people there, it's useless if you're sending it to a platform that you don't own and control. You don't own and control the audience on Instagram or on Twitter or on Webtoons or on comics.com. You don't own them. That you're renting them, but you don't own them. So you got to have a place that you own and control. So, but that being said, like, we are acknowledging the fact that we are in a time of transition where the things that made creativity possible online are breaking right now. BuzzFeed broke up on the shores of the current internet. College Humor broke up on the shores of the current internet. Every newspaper in America is breaking up on the shore of how Google News is handling the current internet, right? Like all of the models are breaking. TV is breaking because streaming didn't work for major corporations. They took this golden goose and they killed it for one golden egg, and now they have no future golden eggs. And so my wife's career is going through this because like all these media companies have fucked themselves, sorry, pardon my French, but they fucked themselves on breaking existing things that worked for things that are temporarily a huge shot in the arm, but eventually wither and die on the vine, right? And so, boy, what a mixed metaphor that was. But you get where I'm going with this, which is that like you'll get in the same way that like you get this jump of energy by capitalizing on this audience from doing it a certain way, but it slowly withers it on the vine over time. And so we're saying that we're acknowledging right now the internet is kind of broken in terms of recommendation engines and on distribution. But you have to own and control the website and the mailing list because it is the core thing that's going to get you to whatever the next thing is 6 months from now, or maybe 6 years from now. You got to have this core thing to get you to the next stage.
Yeah. And so going back to traffic, going back to building audience, right? Going back to how do I build an audience during all of this? Well, I'm going to point you back to our kind of standing advice, which is to use social media. Even though it's broken, you can't quit on it yet, right? So you're still posting your comic on Twitter, and you're not posting a link to your comic on Twitter. That's an easy mistake to make. Well, I've got this website, so I'm going to put a link to the website. Read today's comic at noshoesfortuesdays.com. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
You've got to post the comic so that I can read it on the social media in question without any interaction, without hardly slowing my scroll. That means if you're doing a 4-panel strip, for example, you've got to stack them 2 on 2. It cannot be horizontal because horizontal does not read on a phone. You don't have a choice. You've got to stack it 2 by 2. If you can do a panel by panel slide, either a horizontal scroll or a vertical scroll, depending on the social, you can do that. But you've got to make sure that I can read that comic just by slowing my scroll and then moving on. There can be no clicking, no pinching, no zooming. And I'm going to suggest right now you choose from the standards right now. Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, Mastodon, if that's where you want to go. Instagram, Facebook. Those are your choices.
I would throw Reddit. I would throw Reddit in there, especially if you do a comic about horseshoes.
You can throw all of those in there. And now I've got my opinions on some of those. I'm not particularly hot on Instagram, for example, because I've never gotten a good return on investment. I've been traditionally dour on Mastodon. But listen, you've got to make your own decision. Which one of those are working for you? Right. And then choose 2 or 3 of those. Not all of them, I wouldn't suggest. Just choose a few that you can routinely update and do the 4 C's of social media. It's not going to be enough just to post, but you're got to interact. And all of these social medias get better when you interact with them. That means you've got to be a member of the community. Let's go back to any of our 4 C's of social media conversations and hear us talk about that. So that's my first advice. Second one, I am really, really optimistic about Substack. I've talked about it in the past, not only because I like what they're doing, but because people get an email notification.
Right.
And having just gone through a Kickstarter, and Dave, you're in the final days of yours, everything that I see tells me that email is extremely powerful.
Which
right?
is so ironic
Substack,
because it's, 40-year-old technology, or 30-year-old technology for the most part. And
now
yet
you're bringing me back.
Go ahead. Yeah.
You're bringing me to my next talking point. That old technology is still powerful. Emails, something that none of us have taken seriously for 15 years. Ask anybody who's done a Kickstarter, and they'll tell you things like Substack, and Kickstarter, who sends out emails to previous Kickstarter backers,
right?
Updates that go to your previous backers through an email, right? Emails are incredibly powerful, which is why I've been very, very up on Substack.
And, I used to laugh when I heard the phrase dead internet back in the day, this sort of conspiracy theory that most things are bots online and stuff. But I have to tell you, increasingly, as we go into an AI fueled world, the internet is going to become larger and larger, more useless to us in terms of recommending interesting things, because it's going to be AI created stuff on Instagram or on Reddit or this or that, right? AI created stuff being pushed by AI powered bots that then gets upvoted and pushed in front of you. And you will find over time that it becomes less and less useful or sparks less and less joy with you. And slowly people will start to drift away from that. And what will, I think, happen, to Brad's point, is that some of these old human-based recommendation systems will start to come back into use again,
Yeah. And that's why I want you to also start looking for other people. After you get your website up and running, I want you to start looking for other people who have websites for their comics that are similar, that you can cross promote with, because as social media continues to dwindle, you are going to need to kick it old school like Dave and I did back in 2001 and 2002, because... And I know you think I'm out of touch, but hang with me here. Listen to my words. In 2002, we were exactly where you are now. Think about it. Right now, you're in social media that isn't performing. Well, guess what? There was no such thing as social media in 2002. We found readers without social media the way you're going to have to do today. How did we do it? Well, they bumped into us, word of mouth. They found us. They found us through, I'm going to say SEO on Google, although I'm less impressed with that these days. But they found us, right? But once we found that reader, we passed that reader along. Hey, you like Greystone Inn? You know what? I bet you're going to like Sheldon. It's right over here. We cross-promoted. We had all kinds of ways. And a project that I'm still working on in 2024 is going to test this theory. But we all had different ways of taking that person once we found them and passing them along. Cross-promotion is going to be your key word in 2024 in building an audience. It's going to be cross-promotion.
Yeah. And is it going to work great? I don't know, because we have a whole generation of people that were raised on closed gardens and on algorithmically generated recommendations of, hey, TikTok sees that you like muscle cars, Dave. Here's another Shelby, and so you get a 67 Shelby. But it was clunkier, but it was also more personal, and it was warmer. And there's a big part of me that misses that internet. And I'll just be honest, Brad, and this is the rare time where Dave is a little despondent. I'm not so optimistic that form of the internet will come back or that it will work again, because I don't know that I want to do it again either. I mean, I guess I don't. It's like knowing that you have to diet, but it's like the 2 days before you start the diet, you're like, I don't know that I'm ready to do this yet. Like, I don't know that I'm ready to go back to that internet. So like Brad, I'm still doing social media. I'm still doing all the stuff. I'm still on all the platforms, but I know that they are, I feel it in my bones that they are not working as well as they used to.
Yeah.
And like Brad, I know that I have to maintain the site, maintain the mailing list. Those are working for me. My reach out through Patreon and Kickstarter audiences that I have access to the list and who have been willing to crack their wallet before, those are working. But getting new people off of that, it's not social media. Dear God, is this a hard question? And we don't necessarily have all the answers to this one, you know?
No. Oh, and we need to underline that just in case we buried the lead. We have no idea. We have no idea about any of this stuff. We really are we kind of talked about kind of foretelling this zone way back. If you remember an episode where we talked about the 5 ages of webcomics, right?
Yep.
We're going into another transition. There's going to be another age. We don't know what's going to be on the other side. I can share you, like I just did, my strategies for how I plan to handle this. But I'll tell you why I'm actually more optimistic than Dave is.
Well, God, please do, because
moment.
I'm kind of in a despondent space about what companies have done to the internet.
Whereas you're right that it will be tough to get people to break their habits with social media, right? That they're in the walled garden, they're going to stay in the walled garden. You have to remember that the problem that we solved efficiently, that we solved successfully in that first part of webcomics history was we took people who didn't know what the internet was. We
taught them how to use the internet in a sense.
We taught them. They didn't even know what a webcomic was. Do you stop, Dave? Do you remember explaining to people what a webcomic was? Back in 2001?
All the time.
On a daily.
Yeah.
So if we can do that, take people that didn't even know where we were, and if they found us, they didn't know what they were looking at. If we can do that, we can guide people through a new way of reading comics that doesn't involve social media. We can do this. We can absolutely do this. And we're going to have to do it until the next thing comes around. And the next thing is going to be very, very new and different, and we're all going to have to get used to it. But my point is we can't find the next thing until we do this, because doing this delivers us to the next thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yes. And that's why I say you have to have the website, you have to have the mailing list, because you need that. It's like kind of that old phrase of like any port in a storm. This is the port in the storm, is that the website and the mailing list will be the port in the storm until we get to the next version of the internet, which hopefully is more favorable to an artist sharing their work online and profiting from it. But I want to come back to sort of Webtoons again, because the older cartoonist in me, I just want to reiterate that even though I do not recommend signing with Webtoons, that I personally hired a lawyer and I chose, even though I was super excited and had graphics prepared, we mocked up a whole thing. In fact, I redesigned how I slice up my comics to fit on Webtoons. This is how in I was for it. Once the lawyer came back, I was like, all right, I can't do it. And it was about 2 or 3 weeks of heartbreak. And I was like, I can't do Webtoons. Yeah. But I want to tell you, as an older cartoonist, I get it why younger cartoonists are going there. Because it feels like to them, it feels like the only port in a storm. It's like, well, this is the place where I get traffic. And I want to tell you, I just want to reiterate this point. You will get traffic. But permanently, long term, you won't get the audience, because the audience won't belong to you. And that's how it ties into our first point from the first half of the show, is that you'll get the traffic, but you won't get the audience. The IP might get taken from you. The publishing rights might get taken from you. I don't know. It depends on the contract you're going to sign. I have no idea what you'll be signing. But what I'm saying is, a lot of these companies, the trade-off for them is they'll build you up, but it's because it's to their benefit ultimately, not to you. And that's true with Marvel. That's true with all sorts of people. Owning and controlling your art is a harder path to walk, and it's harder to walk for 5 to 10 years. But the benefit is you own it, you control it, you steer it, and it continues to make you money in old age.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, speaking of old age, I'm feeling my age. We've been talking for an entire hour, and I got to go take a nap. So I'm going to say that you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, who is just a gem. I just want to say that. He's just a gem. He's just an absolute treat. He's the editor of webcomics.com, and he's the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
and my friend Dave Kellett, who's also just a gem.
Aww.
You're also a wonderful person. The co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com, and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with the super talented, with permission from the super talented Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And I'll tell you the real gem here. This episode was edited by the very talented Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions. Poor Matt, who has to deal with the times where I accidentally don't mute my mic when I burp. And I tell you what, Matt, you're doing the Lord's work over there. Matt is at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode like this one. Dave, I want you to hear this wonderful review we got on Apple Podcasts. This says, for Dave.
For Dave?
I just wanted. This is for Dave from Wubbs, WUBBS. Wubbs.
Okay.
I just wanted you and Brad to know that Comic Lab has earned the official Hairy Toe Knucklers of America seal of approval. This automatically puts you in the running for our annual award, the Hirsute Hoof. Wait until you see the statue, Wubbs says. Personally, there's nothing I love more than listening to this podcast while enjoying a cool beverage as I comb my toes. My hairy, oh so hairy toes. Love the show, guys.
Wubbs, thank you. You know how people use the phrase, don't yuck my yums? Thank you, Wubbs, for yucking my yucks. I don't want anything to do with that. So I'm going to, with huge thanks to Wubbs, I now have to go to applepodcast.com and ask them to take down a review somehow. I will say Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/Comic Lab. And because we're really shooting for 500, I will tell you that you're going to get 300 episodes of Pro Tips included with your patronage when you jump in and join us. So I will say that one more time, patreon.com/Comic Lab. Have you ever had this, Brad? You're staying at a hotel, and for whatever reason, they have one of those 10 or 15 person jacuzzis. You know, like, let's just imagine it's a really big round jacuzzi that's like 15 people. Yes. And for whatever reason, you lucked out and you get to the jacuzzi and there's no one there. And it's like 9:30 at night. You're like, the jacuzzi's all mine. I've got the jacuzzi all to myself. And there is no way that I hate humans more than in the moment than one single other guest joins me in that jacuzzi. Suddenly I'm like, I hate humans. I want them all to go away. I don't want any, like, leave me alone in the jacuzzi. Why do you have to join me right now?
For the same reason. So we live in Philadelphia. We live in a row house. In other words, it's my across my wall is one neighbor. Across the other wall is another neighbor. Okay. And it goes like that for an entire block. All the houses are connected, right? I have zero problems with that. But my wife, years ago, when she said, would you ever move into a duplex? I would never move into a duplex. You'd have to rope me up and carry me in kicking and screaming for the exact same reason, because that jacuzzi, if 10 people came in, it would be okay. But one? I will not stand for it. I will get up dripping wet and walk right out. No, 10 people, that's fine. I've got no problems with 10 people in a jacuzzi. One guy, you get to walk the other way. Go to the sauna and take a spritz.
And yet it logically makes sense. I'm 100% with you on that, Brad.
Yes,
I'm 100% with you.
It's the duplex of outdoor water relaxation.
Of human soups. It's the duplex of human soups. Oh, God.
Which would make it a human suplex.